Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'd like to revisit something that I talked about at the end of 2017 but never really picked up again, and that was my 4 phases of book creation. I demonstrated those on my website and with my mailing list if you were part of that when I wrote the Needle Ash, basically the entire series, but I didn't do any videos specifically describing those phases, so let's jump back into it and talk about phase 1, which is the planning phase. This is a very, very important phase. Different people do different amounts of planning depending on how they like to execute phase 2, which is drafting, and that will in turn affect how much time and energy you have to spend on phase 3, which is revision, and phase 4, which is your publication phase. Okay, so those are the 4 phases. So planning can include planning for the story, but it actually includes more than that. And there's 3 big sort of areas that I tend to look at for the planning phase. The first one is you have to decide what you're going to write. And this seems like this should come before planning, but I kind of include in planning because there can be a lot to it. You got to decide what genre you're going to write, because what genre you're going to write in is going to determine how long the planning phase is going to be and what you need to do in it. You need to decide what style you're probably going to try to write the book in. Are you going to write in like a contemporary realist style? You're going to try to go for more idealist style, which is an older style. First person, third person, what kind of feel for the book are you going to do? Are you going to try to chase a trend? Are you really wanting to write a vampire book? Some people will go and use software platforms like Kindle Spy, and it'll go scour like the Amazon store and find, a niche genre that's underserved, and then people will decide to write a book in that genre, and that's a very market-facing way to do that. You don't have to do that. In fact, I don't do that. I tend to just write the stories that I want to write and see if people like them. That's the way I like to operate, because I'm not so focused on trying to get a lot of return or a lot of money in. I really have stories that I care about and I want them to exist. That's my main motivation. But it's okay to have the other motivation. You need to decide what you're going to do. So deciding everything that you're going to do is going to determine the next thing, because if you're writing in historical fiction, for example, you're going to have to go do a bunch of research, and that's going to be part of your planning phase. Going and researching the dress of your historical period and your place, arms and armaments, if you're writing something with war in it, all those sorts of things need to take place in the planning phase. So I wrote a samurai fiction novel. Obviously, I had to research the time period that I was writing that in, the weapons, the techniques, that kind of stuff. That's all part of the research phase. Then next big area is plan the story. So planning the story includes designing the setting, the characters, and the plot. If you're using a regular real-world setting, that would be the research part. And if you're designing a new setting, that's going to be world building. So if you're writing fantasy, designing the setting, that's like, what's the world look like? What are the races in it? And a lot of young writers that are really excited about fantasy, they may spend years actually designing their world that they'd like to populate with a story, in which case the planning phase is really extended and long. And in fact, I've done both ways. I talk about this triangle, setting, characters, and plot. You design the setting, you populate it with characters that make sense in that setting, and then those characters execute a plot. And so for like Prophet of the Godseed, the setting was designed first, then the characters, then I wrote a plot for it. And the setting and the characters were actually designed with Matt Wellman, because we had originally designed this IP for a different format besides books, but it wasn't going to work out in the way that we originally conceived it, and I had a story in mind, so I wrote this book, Prophet of the Godseed. It's a sci-fi book. So in that case, I started with the setting, and I designed the characters, and then I designed the plot. However, with Needle Ash, let's see if I have... Here's the first book of Needle Ash. I did it in reverse, and I did it kind of in reverse with this one. Now, for this one, I started with a story that just kind of popped in my mind when I was driving to Bakersfield one day, and I went from there. I designed the characters to execute the plot that I had in mind, and then I built the setting, and I really kind of had the setting already, but I modified the setting. I built the setting to facilitate the plot existing, and so I went in reverse, and it worked out great for me. Likewise, this book was actually planned in one day because I already had the setting, same setting as this book. I just needed to populate it with characters and design a plot, and so I started with the plot, then I created characters to fulfill that plot within the confines of the setting I designed in this other book. Now here's some of the ways that I do that, just so you guys know. I haven't done a big video on plot yet, and I will do one on everything you might need to know about designing a great plot. And some people actually don't do any plot planning. They like to be gardeners and just write straight into phase 2, in which case you can skip some of these thoughts. But what I tend to do is I think of a sequence of events. I think of a main conflict. So in this one, Helga's husband's sick. she's got to go get a magical item essentially to save him. That's the main conflict. How am I going to resolve it? Bunch of events. It's a journey. It's kind of a hero's journey too. And so I came up with all the different areas that she'd go to and what would happen there. And that was the way I established the plot. And then what characters were going to be there along the way. When I write down characters, I have a list of characters, dramatis personae, and I'll write in their name, what their relationship is to the main character, something about them, what their physical attributes are. And I actually keep it pretty brief because that's something that I kind of like to garden as I'm writing. As I'm writing, I kind of like to let the characters develop as I'm writing and then go back and fix the inconsistencies in the revision phase. That's more fun for me and keeps them more alive and sort of real to me. I don't sit down and write down every little trait about every character. I write down the main characters that are going to be there and some basic stuff. So, Michael, the main character in this book, he's a prince, right? And he's a cavalry officer. That would probably be all that I would write. And then the rest of it would be his development of voice in there. Sharona the mage in this book, she's a mage. She has curly dark hair, and I think that was all I wrote for her. And I said she's very eccentric, and that was it. And I had a personality in mind for her that's far beyond the descriptor of eccentric, and that kind of developed as I'm writing. But I write down all the characters. I write down important bits about the setting, and I may draw a map actually. So I may draw a map pretty early on, so I have an idea of the geographics. And of course, as you're writing the story, you can decide you want a different geographic arrangement of things, and you can change that because after all, you are the author, so you get to make those alterations if you want to. But that's one of the things I do. I like to do a map and think about it. It's a rough map, and then I do a final map at the end. And my fantasy books do include a map, and I usually do the map in the publication phase here. And I don't know if you can see that because of how whited out it is, but there's a map at the beginning of this one that I draw myself. This one was actually drawn digitally. The other one was drawn by hand. And that's all part of my planning. And once I have that plan in case, here's the events and the characters, then I'm feel really prepared to write my first draft. And I know that my first draft is going to end up coming pretty good because I've pre-decided all the important things. Next big area, so once you figure all that stuff out, this is going to help determine the next area, which is planning your process. How long you spend in the planning phase will also determine how long the process is going to be. So how many words per day are you going to write? How many words per day is reasonable for you to write? I think 1,000 words a day is a really good target when you're actively writing a draft. 1,000 words per day, it's pretty easy to get to. It doesn't take up that much time, and it'll give you a buffer. If you feel like writing more in a day, you of course can, and if you don't feel like writing in that day, it may encourage you to just get some stuff down on the paper and get a little bit of work done. But if you write 1,000 words a day and your manuscript's probably going to be 100,000 words, which is a typical length for kind of a standard novel length, then in 100 days you're going to finish that second phase, which is going to help you do other planning. So how many words per day, how long is it going to take to complete? You kind of have a date in mind. You can decide when are you going to get a cover and when are you going to start working on that cover. Because a cover is really, really important. Now, this is for those of you who are going to be indie publishing. If you're going to be traditional publishing, don't worry about that. That's all going to be done by your publisher. And you should instead plan for how you're going to be doing your query letters. And you may want to send your query letters out before you're done with the revision phase to keep things moving along swiftly. So you have to decide when you're going to be sending out agent queries, which is a whole nother process. So decide when you're going to be getting a cover and how much you want to spend on it and how much you're going to spend. And the reason you want to think about that ahead of time is you don't want to get to phase 4 publication and be like, all right, let me find a cover artist. And they're like, can you do this cover? And they're like, yes, I'm available in 3 months. And you're like, I got to wait 3 months to get a cover? Well, I probably should have asked them 3 months ago, huh? So start doing your cover research when you feel comfortable enough during your first draft, or maybe at the end of your first draft, you can do this, depending on how long you think you're going to be in revisions. But somewhere when you're deep into your first draft, it's a good idea to think about hiring a cover designer. If you're going to do that, go out and look at covers, and then you can contact them, and that way you're kind of set up in terms of time, and you know what the cover ought to look like and what elements are going to be on the cover, and that's going to make the cover artist's job that much easier. They'll design a cover for you, and by the time they're finished, you're ready to start doing some maybe pre-release marketing or something, and you have a cover, something to show people, something attractive to kind of link to your story. And of course, if you're designing your own cover, which I tend to design my own covers, most of my covers are designed by me. This is just like a photo composite cover. I usually do this between phase 2 and phase 3, although to me, cover design is really part of phase 4. I tend to do it a little earlier, again, so I have something to show people. And that's what I did for this one. I designed the covers after I finished the second draft. Then I sent it out to my mailing list, did a bunch of revisions, and then put it out. So that's pretty much what I did for that. And you have to decide how long you're going to be spending in revisions. Usually, most people allocate a few weeks to do revisions, but that will also depend on whether you want to farm it out to beta readers. So if you send out stuff to beta readers and you have a list of people who will be beta readers, they may take weeks to finish reading your rough draft, in which case, you're waiting around for their feedback, or you may want to do a couple of revisions, then send it to beta readers, then get feedback, then do further revisions. You have to plan on the length of time it takes people to read books. Not everyone can sit down and read a 100,000 word book in a night. A lot of people can. A lot of people don't have the time. It takes up a couple days, or sometimes more than a week, because they have other stuff they're reading. There's other obligations in their life. They're interested in your book, but it's a lower priority because human beings don't prioritize other people's needs the way they prioritize their own, and that's totally okay. So you got to plan for some time for that, and then you got to decide, are you going to hire like an editing service to do structural editing prior to that, or you don't have access to beta readers, so you want to pay an editor. You got to decide how much you're going to pay. You got to plan for that. You got to plan for the fact that they're going to have it for a few weeks, and that's going to put the release date back. And mainly you want to decide how much you're going to spend. You want to decide when you're going to begin marketing. Are you going to begin marketing prior to release? Are you going to do it at release? I think if it's your first book, I'll talk about this when I get to publication stuff. Marketing prior to release is kind of throwing your money away, because you really want to get people's attention and have something for them to buy right away. And if you are trying to get them to pre-order something kind of sight unseen and they don't know you, it's probably not going to work out. Believe me, I've tried it. So all these things I've made my own mistakes on, and I'm passing that knowledge on to you. The best techniques are passed on by the survivors. So you got to decide when you're going to begin marketing and how much you're going to spend, if any. I actually spend $0 on marketing. I just don't do it because I'm not at a place where I feel like I'm going to earn enough return on the marketing investment to make it worthwhile. I'm basically at that place now, but I haven't wanted to spend money on advertising and stuff like that before now. Just I didn't have enough books to justify it. And then lastly, how are you going to format it? You're going to do it yourself? Are you going to pay someone to format it? How much is it going to cost? How long is that going to take? And will you do a pre-order? If you do really good planning, you can see like, 100 days out, I'll finish the draft. 150 days out, I'll be done with revisions. That means in 160 days, I can set the pre-order up. And once you get your cover, you can work on your blurb and set your pre-order up, and you're good to go. And you can be working on the process while that pre-order is there, and you won't get, you'll have a kind of a drop dead date that you have to work against that will kind of keep you moving too. So that's good too. So those are the three big areas. It's going to be decisions about what kind of story, planning the story itself, planning the process for how you're going to write it. Once you have those in mind, you have a plan to execute the rest of everything. And especially once you have the entire story figured out, the plot, then doing that second phase, the drafting phase, it's way easier because you just kind of go down the list. It's like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. It's how I write plot. It's just a bunch of lines of events. I'm like, okay, next is this, and here's how I'm going to execute it. And these characters are going to do it. And I just write it, and it comes, and it's easy. The better I do at planning, the quicker and easier that first draft comes, and the less fixing I have to do in the revision phase. And there's always going to be some you have to do, so you need to plan to do some fixing. So that's it for now. That's phase 1, which is your planning phase. I think it's the most important phase. If you're not planning, you're planning to fail. So spend some time thinking about things before you just start jumping into writing, and you'll find that it's going to facilitate a lot easier phase 2 drafting, phase 3 revision if you've done a little bit of planning ahead of time. So thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Some of my books that I showed today, Water of Awakening, you can get this on Amazon. There will be a second edition coming quite soon, I think, and same thing with Muramasa, which I don't think I've covered right now. Needle-Ash, you can get the first book for free on Amazon. This is kind of my funnel attraction. There will be like a compendium of all 3 books that'll come out this year too. So if you want to wait for the big volume, you can. And if you've read them, you could give me, and you liked them, you can give me a review on Amazon. That's always appreciated. And I appreciate you watching. Please let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear in the future, and I'll continue this series as I can.